The first moves in the civil war between Caesar and Pompey were made. Italy is now under Caesar's control, while Pompey has retreated to Greece. Caesar decided to secure his western flank by destroying Pompeian legions in Spain, and that led to the battles around Ilerda. In this video we will conclude the Ilerdan campaign and the siege of Massilia, as Pompey's lieutenants attempt to stop Caesar's legions. Organising stories can be hard, but it doesn't have to be, and the sponsor of this video, Campfire Pro, is writing software with tons of tools to keep you organised. Its character pages will help you keep track of all your characters with details and backstories. Timelines can help you hammer out all the plot points. You can even track character arcs and use the map view to create all the locations you need. Best of all, the stories you write are private and no one else can access them. You'll also definitely want to check out their new world building pack. This expansion to Campfire Pro adds more tools to help build your story's world, construct new species, items, magic systems, and develop your cultures with religions, philosophies, and languages with this massive bundle of features. Campfire Pro has a tutorial, but it's so easy and intuitive to use that said tutorial is only 20 minutes long. Campfire Pro has a 10-day free trial and a 10-day return policy. If you decide to buy, it's a one-time purchase of $49.99. Get rid of the messy and ineffective Word documents and spreadsheets. Keep everything easily accessible with Campfire Pro. Support our channel and your hobby by clicking the link in the description to learn more. Caesar's campaign in Spain seemed to be on the edge of disaster. He was stuck in the middle of enemy territory, cut off from his almost 6,000 auxiliary reinforcements and the precious supplies they were bringing, and was days from being starved out. If he was to reclaim the situation, Caesar would need to take control of the eastern bank of the river Sicoris and secure his supply line. With the bridges unable to be repaired due to high water and marauding Pompeian forces, Caesar came up with a different plan. He began construction of several small boats of the kind he had seen in Brittany, made of lightweight timber and animal hides. He then ordered a small detachment to take these boats by wagon at night almost 34 kilometers up the river. These men then crossed the river, fortifying a small hill, giving Caesar a small foothold on the eastern bank. Once this was established, a legion was sent from the main Caesarian camp up the river to construct a bridge from the western bank, while the initial detachment assisted from the eastern bank. Within days of beginning, they had the bridge constructed, providing a route between the eastern bank and Caesar's camp, stabilizing his supply line, and allowing the reinforcements from Gaul to meet up with his legion encamped on the west side. With this influx of troops, particularly the prized Gallic cavalry, Caesar was finally able to harass Pompeian foraging parties on the eastern bank and begin to regain control of the situation. While the Ilerdan campaign was underway, the siege of Massilia was still being fought. For the most part, the siege had thus far been uneventful. Ahenobarbus had largely spent his time amassing a larger navy, and the Romans had been building siege equipment while Brutus's ships blockaded the port. But once his fleet was suitably built up, Ahenobarbus sailed his force out of harbour, hoping to break the blockade and thus bring supplies into the city. He had managed to put together a force of 17 warships, as well as several smaller vessels manned by archers, against Brutus's 12. The Massilian ships were also lighter and more navigable compared to the rather cumbersome ships that the legions had built. However, Brutus did have the advantage in quality of fighters. Ahenobarbus's men were largely farmers and local Massilians pressed into service alongside allied archers, while Brutus's ships were crewed by legionnaires who had specifically volunteered for the task. If Brutus could catch Ahenobarbus in close quarters fighting, the battle would be his. As the fleets met, the Massilians used their agility and range to their advantage, circling the Caesarian ships and peppering them with missiles, or sailing past to sweep Brutus's decks with arrows and smash his oars. But when the Massilians got too close in this manner, the legionnaires would throw across grappling hooks, pulling the Massilian ships close, holding them fast and boarding them. In these situations, the legions had a clear advantage. Their heavy armor and training allowed them to cut through the Massilians on board, on occasion even boarding 2 Massilian ships at once, one on either side. Though Caesar notes the bravery of the Massilians, they were simply not equipped to fight hand to hand with legionnaires like this. The Massilians were forced back into port, having lost more than half their ships, and the blockade continued. This victory at Massilia coincided with a continuous change of fortune at Ilerda. With the new bridge completed, Caesar's superior Gallic horsemen were able to harass the Pompeian foragers, and were even able to force them to resort to foraging at night. The odds were turning in Caesar's favour. As a result, numerous local tribes began supporting him with grain, as well as some more auxiliaries. Seeking to apply even more pressure to Afranius, he began construction of a number of ditches to divert the river Sicoris and create a ford close to his camp, which would allow even more of his men easy access to the eastern bank, rather than taking the circuitous route to the bridge up the river, thus completely removing the Pompeians' chances of foraging. Afranius recognized how precarious his situation was becoming. Running out of food, and with local tribes pledging allegiance to Caesar threatening to surround his position, he decided to make a tactical withdrawal to further Spain to continue the fight on his own terms with the advantage of Varro's 2 extra legions. Afranius ordered a few ships on the river Ebro to construct a pontoon bridge 30 miles to the south, providing an escape route. At the same time, Afranius ordered 2 legions across the stone bridge to the eastern bank, establishing a fortified position in preparation for the evacuation of the rest of the army. When Caesar learned of this, he saw his opportunity to catch Afranius. He ordered his men to work day and night on the riverworks, managing to lower the water level enough to move his cavalry across the Sicoris to try and harass the Pompeians. However, the Pompeian legions had been quick and were already dug in, leaving little for the cavalry to do. Afranius then moved his full force across the Sicoris into the new camp, leaving just 2 auxiliary cohorts to garrison Ilerda itself. In the early hours of the following morning, Afranius and Petreius began moving their entire army out of camp and to the south, heading towards the Ebro and the pontoon bridge. Caesar needed to act fast. If the Pompeians could reach the pontoon bridge, they would be able to escape to further Spain, merging with Varro's legions and prolonging the Spanish campaign. He first sent his cavalry to harass the Pompeians, attacking the rear of their column, slowing the Pompeian legions to a crawl as they fended off the attackers. Though the ford was not wholly completed, Caesar ordered pack animals to wade into the river to help slow the current, and marched 5 of his legions across, leaving 1 to guard the camp. Taking these legions, Caesar marched quickly to try and cut off his enemy's escape, and, thanks to the harassment of the Caesarian cavalry, by mid-afternoon his army had caught up with the Pompeian legions. Both armies were now camped on the eastern bank, the Pompeians slightly further south than the Caesarians. Scouts for both sides reported that the only way south to the Ebro was through the mountain passes, just under 8 kilometers away. Whoever controlled these passes would easily be able to defend them from the other, and a brief standoff ensued. Afranius did not want to risk attempting to march his army through the narrow defiles with Caesar pursuing him, and Caesar did not want to try and force a way through the Pompeians to the mountains. Afranius did consider attempting a night march to the mountains, but decided that, with Caesar's cavalry patrolling the area at night, they would quickly be found out. Night battles were extremely risky and difficult, and so Afranius decided that it was better instead to attempt a fighting retreat the next day. Caesar, meanwhile, had also concocted a plan. At first light, he feigned a withdrawal to the Sicoris and Ilerda, then rapidly changed direction, marching quickly for the mountains. Seeing this maneuver, the Pompeians immediately broke camp, racing towards the mountain passes. The Caesarian route was a harder march, with the terrain slowing down the legions, but the Pompeian forces found themselves constantly harassed by Caesar's cavalry, and this proved once again to be the difference. Caesar reached the passes first, drawing his army into a line, cutting off the Pompeian escape. Afranius tried sending light auxiliaries to quickly seize high ground ahead of his main force, but the Caesarian cavalry was quickly able to surround them, and without support, they were easily cut down. With his opportunity to escape cut off, Afranius saw little choice but to encamp on a small hill and contemplate his next move. Caesar was happy to let him do so, and saw no point in risking the lives of his men in another battle. With the road south now blocked, it would only be a matter of time before Afranius ran out of food and water. The Pompeians could try and retreat back to Ilerda, but Caesar's legion left in the camp would be able to cross the ford and block the stone bridge, whilst Caesar's main force could attack them from behind. If the Pompeians stayed, they would eventually run out of supplies. If they retreated, they would be caught in a pincer. Caesar fortified his position, setting up outposts in the mountains, and awaited his enemy's next move. Afranius's priority was to secure his water supply. He had sent men to the river to gather water, but they had faced constant harassment from the Caesarian cavalry. In response, his legions had built a rampart from his camp to the river, allowing his men to collect water from behind the defences, bringing the fighting to a pause. As the Caesarian troops also came to the river for water, men from both sides began talking to each other. Caesar's legions contained many Iberians, and they began to ask the Pompeian legions about family, friends, and discuss the politics of the war. Old friends and acquaintances from both sides met, bringing them back to their camps to drink and reconnect. Some of Afranius's Spanish allies, and even some officers, went over to Caesar's camp to speak with Caesar personally. Caesar attributes these actions to his not having committed to a full-pitched battle the day prior, and that the Pompeians saw this as an act of leniency. While this might be true to an extent, the main motivator was more likely that the Pompeian forces understood the situation they were in, that it was only a matter of time before they would be starved into defeat and were losing the will to fight. Afranius did little to quell such stirrings. It seems that he too had lost the desire to continue the battle. Petreius, however, had not. To restore discipline in the camp, he demanded oaths of loyalty from Afranius and the entire army, and then ordered any Caesarian soldier found in the camp to be executed. There had been a brief moment of peace in the chaos of the civil war, where men who just the day before had been fighting each other had come together in peace, but now the peace was broken. The soldiers returned to their respective camps and prepared once again for battle. In a last-ditch attempt to retake control of the situation, Petreius attempted to retreat back to Ilerda. The entire way the Pompeians were harassed by Caesar's cavalry and shadowed by his legions, blocking them from crossing the Sicoris at every turn and slowing them down to a grueling pace. On the third day of this harassment, the Pompeians were forced to set up camp on unfavourable terrain. Caesar saw his opportunity and began work on his own earthworks surrounding the Pompeian camp, a similar tactic to Alesia, cutting off any possibility of foraging. Blockaded on all sides, devoid of water, and having been harassed for days, the Pompeians finally sued for peace. Caesar, never one to miss out on a public relations opportunity, promised leniency for all the men and officers, including Afranius and Petreius, in exchange for the complete surrender of the army and the promise that none of them would take up arms against him. The Pompeians gratefully accepted. With the surrender of this main Pompeian army, Caesar assigned 4 legions, the 6th, 9th, 11th and 14th, to accompany the Pompeians to a safe location and disband them, before heading back to Italy. Caesar meanwhile took the 10th and 7th into further Spain to confront Varro. Varro, who had initially been encouraged by the early reports of Afranius' success at Ilerda, had been gathering more forces, raising another 2 legions, giving him a total of 4. When news came to him of Caesar's victory at Ilerda, he began to march 2 legions to Gades, where he planned to hold out and prolong Caesar's war in Spain. However, news of Caesar's victory at Ilerda had spread fast, and the locals had seen the writing on the wall. The chiefs of local tribes met Caesar at Corduba and pledged allegiance to him, and the chief of the Gades closed the gates of the city to Varro. To make matters worse, one of Varro's legions that was with him mutinied, striking their colours. Having lost the support of his army and the locals, Varro sent word to Caesar that he was ready to surrender. Cassius Longinus was assigned as governor of Spain by Caesar and assumed command of Varro's 4 legions, making them the 21st, 22nd, 23rd and 24th. Pompey's entire Spanish army had now either been disbanded or had sided with Caesar after just a couple of months. Taking his 2 veteran legions, the 7th and 10th, Caesar left Hispania to rejoin his forces at Massilia. The siege of Massilia was still ongoing. Trebonius, who had been left in command of the legions during the siege, had constructed trenches, walls and towers blocking off the peninsula upon which the city stood. Brutus maintained the blockade from the sea, so together they effectively surrounded Massilia. The city would not be easy to take though. Its position was ideal for defense, funneling any land forces onto one front, and the city was protected by high, strong walls topped with ballistae. Trebonius had ordered the construction of a siege ramp, as well as a battering ram, but the Massilian ballistae and numerous sorties had been effective in slowing the Romans' construction of their engines, and had, so far, dissuaded any serious assault on the city's walls. The Massilians had also made repairs to their fleet following their previous defeat, bringing the number of warships back up to 17. However, most of these ships were refitted merchant vessels or old warships crewed by lightly armed archers. The Massilians simply could not afford to move their best infantry from the walls to the ships. Fortunately for them, however, Pompey had sent a fleet of 16 ships to reinforce them. These were commanded by Lucius Nasidius, and though were mostly hastily built smaller ships, some had bronze rams, presenting a serious threat to Brutus's navy. A small vessel was sent to the Massilians to alert them of the coming reinforcements, and Ahenobarbus seized the opportunity. Sending the Massilian navy out, they slipped Brutus's blockade and met Nasidius's fleet at Taurois, just down the coast from Massilia. Brutus too had increased the size of his fleet, having captured 6 ships in the previous battle, and manned them with legionnaires. Although outnumbered almost 2 to 1 by the combined navies of Nasidius and the Massilians, Brutus had the distinct advantage in quality when it came to hand-to-hand fighting. Buoyed by his previous victory, Brutus gave chase and set sail for Taurois. The Massilian ships were stationed on the right, with Nasidius and his fleet on the left. Knowing that the Massilians would favour a missile battle, Brutus determined that it would be best to engage the Massilians first, catching them in close quarters before facing Nasidius's ships. He therefore determined to focus almost all his ships on the Massilians. As they had done previously, the Massilians attempted to use their agility and superior seamanship to outmaneuver and separate Brutus's ships. This was an effective tactic, and when they could separate a Caesarian ship, they would pepper it with javelins and arrows, inflicting numerous casualties. However, once again, whenever they drifted too close, Brutus's men would cast their grappling hooks, pulling their foes close and boarding them. Once boarded, despite the bravery and determination of the Massilians and their allies, they were simply outclassed by Roman discipline and weaponry and were butchered on the decks. In a frantic attempt to win the engagement in one decisive move, the Massilians targeted Brutus's own ship, distinguished by its standard. 2 Massilian ships attempted to ram the ship from either side, catching Brutus in a pincer. Just as they closed in though, Brutus's ship darted forward, the two Massilian vessels colliding into each other head-on. Now disabled, they made easy prey for Brutus's ships, who quickly set on them, sinking them both. It was at this point that Nasidius abandoned the battle, taking his entire fleet with him. Seeing there was no chance of victory, the Massilians quickly followed suit. Brutus had won without losing a single ship and sustaining only light casualties, while the Massilians lost a total of 9 ships, 5 sunk and 4 captured. It is unknown why Nasidius did not commit his men. Caesar blames it on cowardice. However, given that he and the fleet sailed to Spain immediately following the battle, it is possible that Nasidius, upon seeing the Massilians being decimated by Brutus's men, thought it better to pick a later engagement where the odds would be more in his favour. Whatever the reason, he had not lost a man, never having engaged in the battle. The remainder of the Massilian fleet limped back to its home port and would not emerge from it again. Caesar was consistently complimentary of the Massilians who manned their ships, most only being citizens wanting to fight for their city, and he admired their bravery and determination. Against the skill and heavy arms of Roman legionnaires, however, they simply did not stand a chance. With the naval battle won, the Romans turned in earnest to the land assault. A way was needed to assault the walls without risk of missile fire, and without risk of the siege engines being burnt during a sortie. As such, Trebonius began work on a huge tower. The tower was 9 meters each way, with walls almost 2 meters thick of brick and clay. The Romans built the first layer of this tower, topping it with a lid with long screens attached to the sides. They then used screws and levers to raise this lid, the screens hanging down to cover the gap between lid and wall, and would then build the wall up to the height of the lid. They continued this process until the tower was 6 stories, building in shooting platforms for archers and ballistae as they did, allowing their men to fire down on the enemies on the wall. With this completed, Trebonius's men next began work on a 20-meter long gallery, starting from the base of the tower, which provided protection. In effect, this was almost like a huge covered sledge. It could be pushed forward and backward, and was topped by a sloped roof covered in tiles and clay to prevent it being burnt down. When it was completed, it was pushed forward from the base of the Roman tower to the base of a tower in the Massilian wall. Under this protection, legionary engineers began the work of undermining the Massilian tower, removing bricks with crowbar and chisel. The Massilians attempted to throw rocks and pitch down onto the engineers, but the Roman defences proved sturdy and the men were protected. In due time, the undermining began to pay off. The Massilian wall began to crumble and tilt. The Massilians quickly came out of the city. They acknowledged that Trebonius had now won the siege, realizing that as soon as their tower collapsed, the legions would flood the city. They requested a truce, asking if they could await Caesar's arrival to negotiate with him personally. Trebonius, seeing little reason in risking his men's life, accepted, and the legions pulled back from the walls to wait for Caesar. But the Massilians were bluffing. Once the Romans' guard was down, they sallied out at night, burning down the Roman siege ramp and battering ram. Though Trebonius and his men quickly caught on to what was happening and tried to fight back the sortie, missiles from the Massilian walls prevented them from doing so effectively. The Massilians were even able to set fire to the Roman tower from the inside, as well as the gallery, destroying months of work in a single night. However, this was only a small success for the Massilians. The siege had been going on now for 4.5 months. With their navy destroyed, they had no means of bringing in fresh supplies into the city. The supplies they did have were running low, and disease had begun to spread among the populace. Moreover, the Romans had once again started constructing siege works, this time building a gallery extending to the walls made of brick. To make matters worse, Caesar arrived with his 2 extra legions. His arrival also made it clear to the Massilians that Spain had indeed fallen to Caesar, and they would not be receiving any reinforcements or supplies. Diseased, starved, and now horrifically outnumbered, the Massilians finally surrendered. Just before they did, however, Ahenobarbus escaped. He was still not ready to give up the fight, and commandeering 3 ships, made a daring dash past Brutus's blockade during a storm. Brutus's ships pursued, catching 2, but the one Ahenobarbus was on slipped away in the storm. He would live to fight another day. Caesar left the 18th and 19th legions to garrison the city, while he marched to Italy with the 5th, 7th and 10th to rejoin his main army. In 7 months, Caesar had chased Pompey from Italy, secured his western flank, disbanded 5 of Pompey's legions, and absorbed a further 4. So far, the war was going very much in Caesar's favour. But this was still just the start. Ahenobarbus had managed to escape to Greece to rejoin Pompey, and was soon followed by Varro, Afranius and Petreius, despite the latter two's oath to Caesar. Pompey was amassing a vast army in Greece, and he still held the lucrative territories in the east, as well as the important grain hub of North Africa. The war in the west might have been over for now, but the war for the rest of the Roman world was about to begin, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.